it's very hard to budget for a president that wakes up, changes our economic policy on a position, and then changes it again the next day. How do people plan for that? We already know that a majority of Americans don't have enough in savings to withstand like a major expense or emergency. How do you budget for the administration being the emergency?
Is the U.S. economy crashing? Everywhere you look, there are signs of stress, from the housing market and auto loan defaults to the impact of tariffs on farmers and credit card delinquencies. To better understand this issue, I called my friend Aya Ibrahim. Aya is a fellow at Columbia University Center on Global Energy Policy. She is an economic policy expert and Biden-era senior advisor. Aya, thanks so much for making some time for this.
Of course. Anything for you.
Yeah, I want to kind of help us kind of understand. I want you to help us understand what's happening in the economy. There are all of these economic indicators that a lot of people kind of are talking about right now. So I want to start with the housing market. I'm reading that sellers outnumber buyers by more than 500 people, according to Redfin's latest data. This is the biggest gap on record since they started collecting that data back in 2013. What explains this kind of gap, and what does it mean?
Well, I just want to take a step back because
Sure.
you started with the question of like what is happening in our economy.
Yep.
And I think across the board, it's a bit of a split screen. So you have what is happening in the real economy to everyday working Americans, and then you have what's happening in the stock market and among the wealthiest in the country. And those are two very, very different experiences. And you will see that play out across a number of indicators. On the housing question specifically, I think this is a bit interesting because, as I understand it, this Redfin data actually came out a few months ago initially. And so I don't know if it was someone posted it on Twitter or something more recently. And so now it's been making the rounds, or if they've updated the data. There's been this gap between sellers and buyers for some time. And there are a number of reasons for it. Between 2020 and 2023, home prices went up like 30%. And they obviously haven't come down anywhere close to that. There have been marginal decreases, but nothing that would, totally offset that pretty significant increase in such a short amount of time. The other thing is, of course, mortgage rates. And mortgage rates currently are about twice what they were at their lowest in the beginning of the pandemic. And we've talked about this before in our own sort of, housing experiences. That was a time where a lot of people locked in a rate. Either they bought for the first time, or they bought a home, or they refinanced. And so if you think about it, why would you go from a 3%, sub 3% interest rate to then having to face a housing market where at best you're getting 6.3, I think. Like we're now sub 7%, but it's still significant. So you're paying more for less house.
Yeah, no, for sure you are. I was lucky enough to have bought a house. I've told you this in the past that my wife and I, we bought a house in the summer of 2021, which means we got the 2.75, which is just like free money. It just feels like free money. And now the thought is like, should we get something else? And then you look at the interest rates and it's like, absolutely not. I want no parts of that. So I totally understand what you're saying.
Right. Exactly. I mean, I bought in December. I closed in December 2020, right? It was a great time to do it. I would not do it again. But I think for a lot of people, the other piece of it is, okay, what's the distribution of the supply? And by that, I mean, for people who are looking for starter homes, for people who are looking for much more affordable housing, so on the lower end of the spectrum, is that actually available to them, right? So there's also the question of like, does the demand map out onto the supply, if that makes sense, is what people are selling, what buyers are actually looking for. I have not done a deep dive in the data for quite some time, but a perennial issue always is that we don't have a sufficient supply of starter homes, right? For people who want to buy for the first time, there's just nothing affordable or available to them.
That makes sense. Okay, so I want to also talk about the subprime auto loan
Mm,
issue that's kind of coming up as well. Maybe this is all data that's been around for some time. I don't know. I know that it's kind of trending on Twitter and it's coming up on my feed quite
mm,
a bit in the last few days. And I think part of that is because of a third issue that we'll come to in just a bit. But I do want to start here with the auto loan issue. The Guardian
mhm.
published an article reporting that subprime auto loans are going into default at an alarming rate, that folks on Wall Street are sounding the alarm. What's happening here?
I mean, I think that it's just another indication of how people, lower to middle income Americans, are doing. People are not in a good place, and they haven't been for some time. And as you and I have chatted about offline, a frustration that I had always is, this is during the Biden administration, we tried to convince people they were better off than they were, and they just were not. And we're now seeing it in the labor market. It's softening. It's harder to get a job. There are not as many job openings. Increase in wages have like totally slowed down. Um, and that's to say nothing of the fact that inflation hasn't really abated in a way that people feel like what they are making is enough to afford what they need to buy. Um, so I don't find this data surprising. I mean, we started seeing delinquencies go up even in 2024. And I think I want to say summer 2024, it had been the highest since 2009. And now the current data is even higher than that. Um, it is, I think, less than a fifth of the overall auto loan market. So it's not a huge, huge part. That being said, it is a bellwether of how the most economically vulnerable Americans are feeling, are experiencing. The average price of a car today is $50,000. That's average.
It's crazy.
And right, for many Americans, that's like what they make in a year.
That's right.
And so the other thing that people are having to do is take out loans over a longer period of time because rates overall are higher too. So people are just stuck in really, really hard situations that are unsustainable for them. The other piece of news that I saw more recently, there was a subprime lender, a pretty significant subprime lender called Tricolor, based out of Texas, that went under, and they predominantly serve subprime borrowers, so people with lower credit scores, and I believe also those who are undocumented.
Mm.
So there are like fissures across the board. The other group of borrowers that I would love to call attention to is student loan borrowers,
Yeah.
because we are very much looking at a potential default cliff for them as well. And you may have seen the Trump administration reverse course and says, actually, we're going to allow for some cancellation of student debt, or we're going to allow for some of these repayment plans, because even for them, like this is not sustainable. The debt is not manageable. These people are not going to pay it back. You have over 5 million borrowers in default and over 4 million who are in late stage delinquency.
It's
What are
not
you
happening.
going to? It's correct.
It's not
Correct. So
happening.
it's just not happening. It's just not happening.
Yeah. Okay. Last thing before we get out of here.
Mm.
There's been a lot of talk about U.S. farmers. They're kind of freaking out. One, soybeans. Two, Trump announced yesterday, or said sometime earlier this week, that we'd start importing beef from Argentina. So there are all these like little issues kind of happening around our farmers. I even saw the president of I want to say Kansas Farmers Bureau, basically kind
Mm.
of come out and criticize the president for some of his comments around the price of beef. And maybe even working with Argentina to import beef. And so there's a lot happening here. I want you to respond specifically to this question about like how this is all going to affect consumer prices, and what we should make of the kind of whole tariff thing as it relates to our food.
You ask these questions like this is light lift, and
It's a
I can
small
look at
thing,
my
just a
crystal
small
ball.
question.
Just a small question. Um, I like there is the what you would expect based on what they're saying. If you put tariffs on something, it's going to cost more money, right? That's like what we have been taught. And if demand for something goes up, then it'll be more expensive. If you increase the supply by importing more of it, then price goes down, assuming you're not tariffing it on its way in.
Hmm.
And on beef, what I understand is that it's like processing that is actually where a lot of the cost is coming in, and less on the actual like cattle. But
Right.
I am not an expert in that, so I do not want to claim it.
Sure.
What I'll say is this: the Argentina of it all is in the background of this entire discussion as well. And so you've imposed these tariffs, and you've also pursued this bailout of Argentina, despite the fact that the economic reforms that they're touting are not working, and that's why they need yet another bailout.
Right.
Argentina then turns around and starts selling China soybeans because China is not buying soybeans from American farmers anymore, but they still need soybeans, and they're still going to import them. And so it's like you're getting played on both ends. And so, like, President deals, I don't know if this is the best one. And on farmers, this is not their first rodeo with this president and his policies. Back in the first Trump administration, I think they saw a bailout of almost $30 billion. Same thing, imposed tariffs, the buyers stopped buying, and the farmers still had to find a way to make money off of the supply that they were sitting on. Buyers were not here, so we bailed them out. But and I don't know if the leader of like Kansas farmers had said this, but I hear over and over again that folks are just not, they're not looking for a handout. They don't want a bailout, right? They just want to be able to sell what they're growing. And this president, his policies is making it very difficult to do so.
Can I ask you a question about that? That point about a bailout, one of the kind of underlying questions that I've been thinking about is, would things have been better if Vice President Kamala Harris was President Kamala Harris right now? And this idea, when I was reporting on this stuff last year, like literally a year ago, one of the things I heard over and over again was that we don't want the home buyer program. We don't want a bailout. We don't want a stimulus. We don't want a handout. We just want things to be affordable. We want to be able to get it on our own. We want good jobs and that kind of thing. And it feels almost like a little counterintuitive. I think those things are what allow you to do it on your own. And we know, this is now me. This is my opinion. So this is me talking. We know that billionaires get these kinds of handouts more or less all the time. That makes it possible for them to do the things that they do. But I'm curious if you think that lower income Americans would be in a better place today if Donald Trump wasn't president and Kamala Harris was.
That is, yes, based on the platform that the vice president had put forward at the time, low-income Americans here in the United States not only would be better off. You would not have the arbitrary tariff approach that this administration have. You wouldn't be picking fights with allies left and right. You wouldn't be injecting unceasing chaos and uncertainty into people's day-to-day lives, right? And so, when I talked about a split screen economy at the beginning, people keep waiting for the market to react, and they'll say like, oh, the market has priced this in. Okay, well, the market can price this in, but regular working people cannot. So it's very hard to budget for a president that wakes up, changes our economic position or policy on a position, and then changes it again the next day. Like, how do people plan for that? We already know that majority of Americans don't have enough in savings to withstand like a major expense or emergency. So how do you budget for the administration being the emergency? Right. And that's to say nothing of, and I should have started at the top, which is the heinous tax bill that the Republicans passed earlier this year, where you are slashing SNAP food stamps, you're slashing supports to low-income families and children. You're cutting Medicaid. These are not things that would have been on the table. So you are making it harder for people to get by just based on the work that they're doing. And then you're also taking away the safety net that's supposed to catch people when they fall. That would not have been the case in a Harris administration.
Aya Ibrahim, thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you.